Welcome to the 8th Annual State of Our Children Address and Report Card Release. I'm Simeon Bannister from Rochester Area Community Foundation and a Rock the Future Convener Board member. This week, we are pleased to host 4 power-packed virtual conversations focused on equity and education. Today's conversation on the digital divide is championed by Rochester Area Community Foundation, along with our partners at the United Way of Greater Rochester. But I would also be remiss if I did not tip my cap to the many philanthropic partners that have been engaged and responding to the digital divide and challenges of the coronavirus pandemic. Be sure to join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag SOOC, S-O-O-C, State of Our Children 2020. Hashtag SOOC 2020, as in State of Our Children. And as we are proceeding today, please share your questions via Facebook Live. We'll answer as many as we can with our panelists. Now, those of you that know me well know that I tend to trend on the optimistic side, but today I start with a note of caution. The number one benefit of information technology is that it empowers people to do what they want to do. It lets people be creative. It lets people be productive. It lets people learn things they didn't think they could learn before. And so, in a sense, it is all about potential. It's a quote from Steve Ballmer, now the owner of the LA Clippers. But take a moment to reflect on this comment in this context. In so doing, we have to reckon with all of the potential that we are conceding right now through rampant inequity. The human talent that is not being maximized. And why? Because our kids can't connect to the internet? At this very moment, as we hurtle towards a vaccine for COVID-19, consider that in our community, we might have the cure for forms of cancer. Perhaps we have the cure for the next pandemic or virus. In a child's mind right here in Rochester, with the right opportunities, there might just be the solutions to redesign our entire healthcare system. If we can't figure this out, not only do we deprive that child of the opportunity to realize her potential, but we are also depriving ourselves of the benefits of that fully realized potential. Cultural critic Howard Rheingold goes even further in redefining the challenge looming before us in this way. He says, soon the digital divide will not be between the haves and the have-nots. It will be between the know-hows and the non-know-hows. Friends, we are quite literally redefining the fundamental underpinnings of our economy. And to quote the sorority of our new vice president, this, my friends, is a serious matter. This year's theme is Equity and Education, the Next Horizon. The Next Horizon, a perspective Regent Wade Norwood helped to clarify for us earlier this year. Looking to what's ahead while taking stock of where we are today, along with our efforts to make a better tomorrow. It's the place and the space we are preparing for, all while creating and making change in our current environment as we transition from the old. In these unprecedented times, we can no longer act in ways that support the old ways of solving problems, and we have to change the way that we do business. We have to think beyond our current circumstances and ensure that equitable outcomes are the focus and that we achieve them for all. Rock the Future is a cross-sector partnership bringing key stakeholders and the community to the table to work on systemic issues impacting education together. When the pandemic hit in March, organizations quickly mobilized to address the impact that stay-at-home orders would have on children. Students needed access to technology and the internet, and they needed it quickly. And in April and May, a coalition of partners successfully distributed 12,096 Chromebooks and 2,800 MiFi units to RCS students in grades 4 through 12, as indicated in this year's report card, which, by the way, is now available on rockthefuture.org. And even now, partners have come together to supply an additional 5,000 MiFi units that are upgraded with data to help in addressing this challenge of the digital divide. Oliver T. Brooks, president of the National American Association, said pandemics don't create disparities, they expose them. The ability to access computers and the internet has become increasingly important as we navigate through the coronavirus pandemic. However, not everyone has access to this technology. So, of course, the digital divide refers to the growing gap between the underprivileged members of society who do not have access to computers or the internet, or the means who do. And it also references those that, even with technology in place, haven't developed the capacities or skills to use that technology. This impacts our children greatly, who are most impacted by poverty and racism. So how, in fact, do we close the divide? Today, we'll hear what the Rochester community is doing to address the digital divide, what more needs to happen, and how students are being impacted by distance learning. As a quick reminder, please be sure to participate with your questions via Facebook Live, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Joining us for today's conversation is a wonderful panel. And that panel includes Stephanie Townsend, Rock the Future Director of Research and Analytics. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Simeon.
We've got Glenn Vanderwater, Rochester City School District Chief Technology Officer. Good to see you, Glenn.
Thank you for having me.
And Reginae Walters is an East High School student and class of 2022, perhaps one of those minds we referenced earlier. It's good to see you, Reginae.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't we jump right in and get started, and we'll see if I can manage this technology at the same time. Talk about the digital divide. I know that Glenn is dealing with some challenges for the digital divide, so no worries if you need to tackle any of the challenges that are besetting you. We certainly understand. But we do want to start with you. And Glenn, if you could help us to understand the current status with respect to device and MiFi distributions for the city school district.
Absolutely, and thank you. As Simeon had mentioned, with our philanthropic partners, local governments, the MiFis, starting where we are right now, the MiFis, up to 5,000 of them that we're going to be receiving, are going to have enhanced data for the students, so they will not experience interruptions with their interaction with teachers and other classmates. But going back to last year at this time, back in September, I should say, we partnered with the 1 Million Project, which was through Sprint. And through that donation, we were able to deploy hotspots, MiFis, to our students in grades 9 through 12. In conjunction with that deployment of the hotspots, we also began our one-to-one deployment for take-home. So students would have the ability to take home their Chromebook, bring it back and forth to school every day, and if they did not have reliable internet in their homes, they did have an opportunity to receive a hotspot. Those hotspots came with 10 gigabytes of data that was refreshed every month based on the activation date. Then all of a sudden, COVID came around the corner and hit us square in the face, and we needed to come up with solutions fast because we shut down on March 13th, and we still haven't been back face-to-face to date. With that, we began deployment again, thankfully through philanthropic donors and so much participation from our local community that we were able to begin deployment, which now encompasses all students in grades K through 12 have an opportunity to have a Chromebook in their home if they request one. In addition, we also deployed over 10,000 hotspots in total. And again, as I mentioned earlier, with another 5,000 to come. The 10 gig, and you know, we talk about the divide. Those hotspots that we initially deployed with the 10 gigabytes of data never were really meant for fully remote learning, right? They were for internet accessibility, for students to have 10 gigabytes of data per month that didn't have reliable connectivity. But once we went fully remote, we started to realize even greater gaps in terms of students having the ability to reach their teachers' instructional content in the same modality as suburban counterparts. And it just wasn't happening for us due to the limitations. So where we stand right now, we're continuing to work towards a good place. but we're far from it. I think we all know here that if you don't have at least a hotspot with unlimited data, but better yet, a home internet service provider, you really are missing out.
Thanks so much, Glenn. That's a really serious set of challenges that we're confronting, but it is heartening to hear of the community's response to those challenges. Stephanie, you literally wrote the book, or I guess I should say the report on the digital divide for our community. If you could just maybe give us, that kind of 50,000-foot look at, some of the issues and challenges that we're confronting. Glenn talked about some of the strategies we're already starting to use. Help us just frame up the nature of the challenge that we're confronting.
Thanks so much, Simeon. I think it is important to start by defining what do we mean by the digital divide. There's the way that we are conceptualizing it here in Rochester, there's 5 levels to the divide. The first is the infrastructure. Are there broadband cables in the community? The second is internet access. Do people have a subscription or some way of accessing that infrastructure? The third is, what kind of devices do you have in your home so that you can get onto and use that internet access? The fourth level then are, what are the applications, and do you have the skills within the home, either the student or their family members, to make full use of that technology? And then finally, it's about technical support. What do you have available when you hit those trouble spots? Whether it's a connection problem, a hardware problem, software problem, who is available that you can turn to for that troubleshooting? So when we say digital divide, it really is those 5 levels. And each of those levels requires different strategies in order to close that divide.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. It really is the case that this really does register on a number of different levels. Regine, I'd like to turn to you, and if you could offer us maybe some of your experiential knowledge as a student and someone that's interacting with lots of students. What are you hearing in terms of those levels that Stephanie described and the challenges that students are having through this period?
Yes, thank you. Some things that I have heard, I have been more on the fortunate side, and I have been able to have Wi-Fi here on my own, so it hasn't been a huge issue for me. But I do know some of my other peers who struggle with having a bad connection or in not having enough gigs, and that has been a challenge. So we do want to think about what can we do to create resources or find resources to where we can have better connection so that we can be up for school and be there on time and make sure we're not getting kicked on and off, because it really is affecting how people learn when they can't sign on, because we miss the one-on-one talk in class. So missing that, it's not just simple to, just have work on Google Classroom and do it. Sometimes you need that one-on-one talk with your teacher. And that's what I want to try to help students and myself do. So the MiFis, I do wish that they were more than 10 gigs. I did hear something about them being unlimited, but I do definitely think that we should, as a community, try to maybe fundraise or do something to, make sure that kids have access to those resources so they can have Wi-Fi and be able to connect.
So
online.
Glenn, do you want to share the good news or should I? I'm going to let you do it. You're on mute.
So thank you very much. So, working with Simeon, local philanthropic donors, and Simeon, I don't want to leave anyone out, so please cover me. I believe Monroe County, the Health Community Foundation,
Health Foundation,
and
Greater Rochester Health Foundation, ESL Charitable Foundation, Farish Foundation, United Way is chipping in, and of course us at Rochester Area Community Foundation. Avon Grid has chipped in, and potentially other partners will be jumping in as well.
So what that's going to look like now, it's very exciting because I'm aware, I've just received information that our hotspots are en route to Rochester. The first deployment of hotspots will be 2,900, and the remaining 5,000 will be coming in the second wave. These hotspots that we're getting, again, through our donors and partners, will have unlimited data capacity. And so really what we're going to be able to do is, and how do we identify students that need those hotspots with unlimited data? We're going to look at metrics, okay? We're going to look at students that have moved through all of their data with the 10 gigabytes, and then find out who those students are, collect the older 10 gigabyte data hotspot, and deploy an unlimited hotspot so that we can have a means of identifying our students with the greatest need. Other areas where we may be able to impact families more are families with multiple siblings, families that have pre-K students in their homes, so that if we were deploying, say, 5 hotspots to a family, now we can, or 4 hotspots to a family, we can take those 4 hotspots back and deploy just 1 unlimited data hotspot, because up to 4 people can connect to that hotspot. So we're, again, working towards a good place. These hotspots that are coming with unlimited data really do fit the need for a portion of our students that may be mobile within our community, maybe moving from household to household, or maybe move to a different house during the school day because a parent has to work. Students that are homeless, those hotspots will impact them the most. Stephanie, you brought up some really good points with home service providers, and where is the fiber? You know, how does it impact, or pardon me, project into our community, and the lack thereof. But these mobile hotspots are a great step forward for us.
Reginae, does that sound good? It certainly gets us at least part of the way there, but would love to hear you talk a little bit more about whether, in your experience, your colleagues and fellow students are doing okay with the technology itself. How are they using the technology? Are they comfortable with it? And is there a need for additional learning around the technology?
That was for me, correct?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Yes. For the most part, I do feel like, and that's great that we are doing that now. I'm super excited that that's what we are going to do to move forward. For some of my peers, it has been difficult being online because they get connected or
It looks like we may have lost Reginae. If we get her back, we will add her back into the conversation. But of course, with technology, this is some of the challenge. Stephanie, if I can pivot to you, and just ask you to kind of frame up for us, Glenn talked about identifying need. And in your report, you did some work to outline and give us a sense of what the need might be in this community, who has reliable internet, who does not. Can you talk a little bit about the percentages around the infrastructure we have in place, who's subscribed to the internet? And Reginae, we will come right back to you to get the rest of your question. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thanks, Simeon. So we started back very early last spring and looking at what kind of data did we have available publicly on infrastructure and internet access and device ownership in Rochester. So drawing from data from the Federal Communications Commission and from the US Census, what we see is that the majority of, first off, all blocks in Rochester do have infrastructure for broadband. And in fact, most of our city streets have at least 3 providers, according to the FCC. Now, the issue is just because the cables are there, the infrastructure is there, doesn't mean that you can afford to access it. So we do see that, or like I say, that you have the device to access it. So we do see that in Rochester, 88% of city residents do have some kind of device, and 80% do have some kind of internet subscription. So in that regard, the divide is not as big as some people might think. But on the other hand, the issue that we have been talking about already today is that having a device or an internet subscription doesn't mean that you have the kind of capability you need for education purposes, and especially for fully remote learning. So, for example, we know that about 17% of city residents rely solely on a cellular data plan, and that many of them, that is the only device they have without distribution of Chromebooks through the school for students. So, in that regard, there is not sufficient access because using a cellular plan, A, can get very expensive. B, you may be limited likewise on your data plan. And a cellular phone, as much as these smartphones are incredible and have more computer power than the astronauts had when they first landed on the moon, they try to imagine what the experience is of many students in both high school and college who don't have a program like RCSD has provided, where they're trying to write a term paper on a smartphone, trying to analyze data on Google Docs on a smartphone. It's just not sufficient for educational purposes or for especially for fully remote learning. So that's where it comes down to, is that internet access, is that device the appropriate one for the kind of learning that you're doing? It is also important, the one other thing I would mention here is that although every street has the infrastructure installed, the internet subscriptions vary greatly from one neighborhood to the next. Again, I think this is largely driven by the affordability of those internet subscriptions. So while we do have some neighborhoods in Rochester where over 80% of households have an internet subscription, we also have neighborhoods where only between 20 and 40% of households have an internet subscription. So when we talk about Rochester, it's important that we go down to a deeper level and think about what is the access in different neighborhoods, because we do see some large disparities based on where people live, and that is largely driven by economics.
Thanks so much for that, Stephanie. It certainly presents to us a challenge to confront, that in some ways almost the data gives us a false positive if you look at it at the macro level, but as you dive deeper, you start to see some of those disparities. Regina, you were sharing with us before you cut out just some of the anecdotal experiences you have with your classmates in dealing with some of those disparities. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I 100% agree with Ms. Townsend, just because it has been an issue when it comes to what parents can afford and what they cannot afford. Also, we have to take into account that parents have multiple children. So when you have that, you're having multiple devices trying to connect to one source, that can be a huge issue because sometimes Wi-Fi's aren't as high in strength as others, and that's a huge issue. So like I said before, I want us to be able to find a way together to where we can create those resources so that doesn't happen. And I know money can be a huge issue, like I said, so that we can, maybe start different programs to where we can make different kinds of money or fundraise or do different things in the community as a whole, so that we could create those better things so that kids aren't having an issue every single day struggling with connecting on the internet and it's kicking them off, or they're not able to learn because, the internet is a huge obstacle happening. And I do think that it's important that mostly everyone should have Wi-Fi, but we have to take into consideration not everyone can afford that. Not everyone, some kids and some peers that I know, they're home by themselves all day online trying to watch their siblings as well, making sure they're online. So we have to take into consideration this is also on a personal level. And a lot of kids who are my age, they're kind of the highest kid in their in their home. So I feel like a lot of them are trying to balance doing their work and helping their younger siblings too. So I really think that we should take that into account and try to change that.
Virginie, thank you so much for that. I mean, what I'm hearing is the complicated ways that, the kind of economic factors, the living conditions of families really create, a lot of idiosyncrasies in the experiences that young folks are facing. So thank you so much for that. Glenn, do you care to respond about how the district is trying to address the specificities of the situations that young people are facing themselves? And I know it's one of the challenges of being in a large system, but dealing with lots of kids and varied backgrounds. Can you talk a bit about how you guys are trying to address the varied nature of the challenges young folks are confronting?
Absolutely. And I would like to first start, if it's okay, to talk a little bit about what was just said previously. In terms of connectivity, I think it needs to be looked at as a right. The same way heat and hot water is a necessity, so is connectivity. Look at our Board of Education meetings. The number of viewerships now that we've deployed devices home has increased immensely. Participation, communication back and forth between schools has increased immensely. And when we do get back to face-to-face, what does participation look like? What does parent engagement look like? Does it mean that you have to travel to your child's school and follow their bell schedule for open house? Or does it mean that you can connect through different modalities? The opportunity to be connected is a game changer for our community and communities just like us across our country. So I'd like to say that in terms of connectivity, using a home internet service provider like Frontier or Spectrum, one of the issues that I've also found in our community as I'm handing out devices and having informal conversations with our families is there's not pervasive coaxial going into homes, apartment buildings. If you take a look at 52 Baden Street, where one of our commissioners, Commissioner Elliott, is the director there. And, we've worked with Spectrum and provided some guidance. They still needed to use they needed to come through a neighbor apartment complex from the back in order to get pervasive internet into Spectrum into that building. So while the fiber may be going up and down the street, some of the buildings are set so far back, it can literally cost tens of thousands of dollars to run that fiber to the building. Those were all things I just wanted to talk. And then Virginie talked a little bit about every student is having a little bit of a different experience with the MiFis, and that has to do with cellular density across our community, right? Where the demand is high and there's not enough towers, you're not going to have the same experience as you may up in, say, Charlotte, where you have the towers, but not a large population, right? So each student's experience is going to be a little bit different based on cellular density with the hotspots. Ways that we're trying, and I'm now coming back to your question, Simeon, and I don't want to take too much time. What are some of the challenges we're having in terms of staying connected with our students, staying connected with families? Teachers are doing their best in terms of reaching out. We are taking attendance in our student management system and pushing out robocalls for students that have become disengaged from the learning process. So robocalls are going home to families. Parent liaisons, school administrators, and teachers alike are also reaching out to students that are not actively connected with their classroom or any kind of learning, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous learning. Distance learning, these kinds of opportunities are wonderful opportunities when we're back to normal, right? Learning happens in many modalities, but now we're in this single modality. It does pose a lot of challenges for us, and a lot of them were mentioned here today.
Glenn, in your comment, you referenced kind of going back to normal, and some of us wonder whether we'll ever be back to normal. Is the district doing any thinking about just kind of longer term using technology as part of the educational process? Obviously, you guys had that underway even before COVID, but I suspect that it might be even more robust now. Any thoughts do you have for us to offer as we start to turn towards the next horizon?
That's a great point. Thank you. yes, we are starting to work on some distance learning plans for students that like this engagement, for students that want to continue in this modality. We want to be able to provide those opportunities for students when we do return back to normal. Rochester City School District has a very robust learning management system at different levels. Our students in grades K through 12 all have access to Google Classroom. But for students that are trying to earn credit to graduate, we have a learning management system hosted by Agilix Buzz. It's called the Virtual Academy of Rochester. And in there, we have students that can take online credit recovery courses, virtual advanced placement courses, and virtual initial credit courses like American Sign Language. So we do want to start providing different modalities for students to engage in instruction and learning and earn course credit towards graduation. And I'll just say this, as one of the people that helped develop the learning management system here in Rochester, the interaction and the attention that students get in the Virtual Academy of Rochester, like I had talked about, the online credit recovery, virtual advanced placement, students report that they receive more one-on-one attention in that environment than in a 26-student classroom setting, particularly students that may be not as engaged. Say, for example, for whatever reason, you failed English 1 and now you're a senior. You could be 18 or 19 years old in your 4th year of high school. Is sitting next to a 14 or 15-year-old in an English 1 classroom a great environment for that student? Maybe not. Maybe they prefer to be in a virtual environment and interact in a more private one-on-one interaction with their teacher.
Really fascinating about the possibilities of changing the construct of education. Reggie, I'm going to put you on the spot if that's all right. And you are on the line with the head of technology for Rochester City School District. As a student, as the district is starting to think about, that next horizon and about the future of digital technology, what would you share with them? What do they need to take into account? What do they need to consider?
Do you mean when it comes to having connectivity issues?
Connectivity, and also our Rochester City School District now is, even in this crisis, starting to think through, okay, if we use technology more permanently, this may be a permanent feature of how we do education. What would you tell them that they need to make sure they keep in mind as they start to make those plans?
I think it all comes from the mindset. So we know that we are going to struggle throughout the whole year because we have implemented being 100% online. And from how it's looking, specifically with the RCSD School District, we are going to be online probably for the whole year from what we have seen. But I do feel like we need to keep in count that we just need our mental state to be okay, because I think that's where it starts, because a lot of people, it's affecting the way they think. And I know even some of my peers, they feel very overwhelmed, and it starts, it starts to implement a issue that they feel that I can't do this. I'm not strong enough. I have to deal with this every day. So I think a lot of kids, in order for them to not feel that way, they have to remember, stay happy, be grateful that we are having some sort of education, because the internet situation and having connectivity problems, it really, really has affected me and other people that I know. And I try to wake up every day and tell myself, I can do this. I'm in 11th grade. I'm able to, I'm grateful that I have a decent connection to be online. And I think that's all where it starts. So I think people trying to be on a more positive mindset and thinking, even though that my internet might be messing up, what can we do to fix that, rather than I can't do it at all. So just keeping a proactive mindset and being tenacious and knowing that you can do it.
Stephanie, I know that you approached this from the your kind of training and discipline background is from the community psychology perspective. If you want to just riff on what Reginae offered there, which is a really important point, that for all the technology, for all of the devices and broadband and so on and so forth, we can't lose track of the mental state that young people are in. Can you just talk about the connection there?
Sure. That is absolutely critical, especially right now where we are in this very prolonged for 100% remote learning environment. And I know that's something that RCSD is addressing, making sure that every morning, for example, there's a 15 to 20 minute check-in with students on what their well-being is. How did their day go yesterday? How is how are things going at home? And that's one way. It addresses one level. And then, though, we also, some of it is really being there to also more proactively develop that social and emotional learning, which goes beyond just the troubleshooting and the crisis intervention. But this is something that we are going to have to, as a community as a whole, as well as a school district, be addressing, I think, for quite some time, is not only the learning loss that has occurred, but also the social and emotional impacts. And this is something our whole society is looking at. We are all feeling this. And we are going to have to really have a plan in place when children do return to in-person learning, that it's not going to be just, I think there will be some relief, there will be excitement, there will be happiness about being back in the classroom with your peers and with your teachers. But there's also going to be that need to be very attentive to and have very proactive plans in place to help make up for that social and emotional loss, the grieving that is going on. And especially with the younger students, that there is so much normal childhood development that the youngest students have lost out on. And that because they get a lot of that peer interaction, the learning how to problem solve, learning the social skills, you get that in school when it's not just, sort of the negotiating that goes on between siblings at home. And so we're really going to have to help children, especially those youngest children, recover from those lost opportunities. And that's something that will happen in school, but it also needs to happen outside of school, and where all of our community partners can really step up and will have to play an even bigger role.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I want to start picking up on some of the comments that are coming in through Facebook Live as we round the bend and start to approach the conclusion of our discussion. First, Glenn had mentioned earlier the notion of the internet and access to the internet being a right. There was a lot of feedback and response to that. I want to just reference again the quote that we started out with. Soon the digital divide will not be between the haves and the have-nots. It will be between the know-hows and the non-know-hows. Stephanie, I'd like for you to just riff a little bit further on that. And we can't talk about this conversation in Rochester if we don't talk about racial equity as an overlay. So just can you tell us about some of the trends that we're seeing with respect to racial equity and the implications for our economy?
Sure. So as you said at the very beginning, Simeon, the pandemic has not created the inequity, but it has, I would say, exploded the inequity. And we're going to be seeing that at all levels. In terms of with education, this is where there are projections out there that are grounded in a lot of good data, not only around the learning loss, that it's going to take a few years for our children to recover from, but also about lifelong impacts on earning. And that's where we already have economic inequity in income for individuals and families that is very much tied to racial inequities. But that is likely to get even bigger. So based on other historic disruptions in school, there are projections out there that you may see, depending on how long this goes on, as much as a 5% loss in lifetime earning as a result of these disruptions in school. So this is something that is going to not be over soon for these children. They are going to carry this throughout their lives. Now we can mitigate that disparity and those lifelong impacts by what we do now and what we do over the next couple of years. But it's going to take a real concerted, systematic approach. And we're going to have to set aside, as resilient as children are, this isn't about children. This is about our systems being able to respond in order to support children and families. And so we're going to have to be very intentional, very proactive, and think very long term. It is not going to be, oh, we'll go back to normal, and by the end of a school year, this will all be over.
Yeah, it probably shouldn't be lost on anybody listening that if you took the old map of the old redlining map of Rochester and then did an overlay with where we're seeing these challenges in the same way that you see them in health inequity, in the same way that you see them in criminal justice inequity, and so on and so forth, you see the same thing with the digital divide trends. And so that tells us that there were important moments in history that got us here, to which we need to be attentive. Glenn, that is a tall order for Rochester City School District to have to take on, really wrestling with issues around racial inequity, and then at the same time dealing with the traumas that are associated. A number of comments here about whether the district is taking that into account as it develops its technology solutions. Can you respond to that? Are you guys taking into account racial equity as well as the issues around trauma as these technological solutions are being developed?
Our superintendent is a former school counselor, and this is on the forefront of our minds, based on her background, based on our entire executive cabinet's concerns concerning students not having the supports they had in traditional brick and mortar. I know when I was a fourth grade teacher, I never taught from the front of the classroom. Proximity was a big part of my day, walking around the classroom, interacting with my kids. Now that that's not happening, and Stephanie talked a little bit about students dealing with how do they interact with their peers and that loss of playtime and things like that. Playing outside with friends is very different than a school environment, right? You do have to learn to interact. You have to learn to come up with strategies to problem solve in a school environment. You can't, in the environment we're in right now, if a student is frustrated, they may simply just turn off their camera. You can't do that in the real world. So we are developing plans to address those with our school counselors, with our social emotional support staff, and it is on the forefront of our superintendent's mind as to how we're going to address those issues when our kids come back to traditional brick and mortar classrooms.
Reginae, someone gave you a shout out here and said you are just doing an amazing job advocating for your peers and representing East High School. And so let's give you another chance to do that. Are your peers? I know that earlier in the year, a lot of young folks had really taken to activism and protest as a result of some of the racial inequity that we were seeing. Are you guys seeing this digital divide issue in the same way? Or not? And are you guys taking any action as youth and students in the district?
I definitely think that we are trying to take action. I know many youth advocates in the community who are just like me, who want to build those relationships around the community to be able to create a community to where youth can be heard, because it is important, that young people are heard. We want our newer mindsets, our younger mindsets to be heard, because it is important, because we are the actual people who are suffering what is going on. We are the people experiencing the having troubles online and the connectivity, and also things just in the community about the whole idea of the triple trauma when it comes to coronavirus, when it comes to protesting and looting, when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement. So I think all those things tie in with the whole idea of that we want youth to be heard.
Thanks so much, Reginae, and thank you for lifting your voice to make sure that youth are indeed heard. Stephanie, can you help us to continue to frame up and really kind of understand some potential solutions for, again, as we start to think beyond the horizon to the next horizon? There's been talk in the community about municipal broadband. There's been, conversations around municipal wireless as strategies to engage. Just help us to kind of offer some context.
Sure. And the solution that I hear most people talking about is municipal broadband. And I definitely think that it has potential. It is not, however, the easy fix that a lot of people think that it is. So I know the city of Rochester has been studying municipal broadband, and I've looked as well at a lot of the examples throughout the country. There's 3 communities where municipal broadband is more generally seen as a success. And then there are others where it's mixed and some where it's been deemed a failure. When we look at the successes, they include places like Chattanooga, Lafayette, Louisiana, and Longmont, Colorado. And the reason that I always caution people a little bit about municipal broadband as being the answer is that when we look at those 3 communities, what we have to remember is in none of them is the internet access free. They are still charging internet subscriptions. The idea is that because it's municipal, it would be less expensive than a private company who is doing it. But those subscription prices still range. Chattanooga, which is considered to be one of the best examples of success, those internet subscriptions still range from $58 a month to $299 a month, that high end being for businesses. Lafayette, Louisiana, they range from $49 a month to $99 a month. And Longmont, Colorado has the cheapest, ranging from $39 a month to $69 a month. But this is where municipal broadband, a lot of times people assume that that means you will have free access. But that's not been the case so far. And if that's what we want to do in Rochester, we're going to have to really think very big and very creatively and outside the box. So that's the one caution I would make around municipal broadband. Another idea that is being floated is to bring that price down is rather than doing it at the city level, let's at the state level treat internet access as a public utility, just like we treat water and electricity as public utilities. And the idea behind here is that it taps right into what Glenn said very early on, that internet access should be treated as a right in our current society. It is necessary for education. It is increasingly necessary for receiving medical care, for job opportunity, for so many different aspects of society. So by treating it as a public utility by New York State, then that is where we can again put in regulations, have programs, and have a scale that will take away from that profit-driven approach and make it more accessible to more people. Again, it would still have to be paid for, but just like paying your water bill or your utility bill is a lot cheaper as a public utility than it would be if it was private. That's the idea behind that. But that would require changes in New York State legislation and regulations. So it is something that some people are advocating for.
Yeah, no, it's really a fascinating concept. But I've heard some folks talk a little bit about how you might be able to kind of capitalize productivity so that the increased productivity as a result of having, say municipal broadband or even statewide policy change, to treat internet as a right, that increased productivity can be capitalized and then borrowed against in the present to cover some of the infrastructure costs. So really, really fascinating area. To get any of it done, it sounds like it does require some advocacy and activism. Reginae, are you guys ready as students to kind of take on that role and take on that mantle? I'm not sure if she heard me or not. In the meantime, Glenn, do you mind talking a little bit about what you see in terms of the opportunity for increased productivity for our students. We said at the outset that, hey, there might be the next cure for a pandemic, or new solutions and strategies for dealing with the challenges we face in climate change and in other places. Can you talk a little bit about, just as an educator, what you see as the possibilities for increasing our productivity as a community through the interview?
Absolutely. So, I always, as an educator, I always go back to learning, right? So not all learning. A matter of fact, I'd argue the majority of our learning as people happens informally and not formally. So providing this access to our community, it provides such a benefit for interaction, as Stephanie talked about. I use MyChart, for all my medical bills and appointments and such. But, also, we talk about informal learning, informal interactions. Think about what that can do for our community. I mean, even doing something as participating, say, in an NFL mock draft or something like that. That's a learning experience, right? I mean, how many of us sit around with our laptops in our lap and on our couch and do something recreationally and learn from it? So many of our students just don't, and our families don't have the opportunity to do that. I take a look at, I'd mentioned earlier about our Virtual Academy of Rochester. What I'd like to say is 25% of our on-time and early graduates have earned a credit in the Virtual Academy of Rochester. And in fact, the students that take virtual advanced placement courses, on average, every year have scored 1 point higher on the AP exam than their counterparts that take a traditional brick and mortar. I'm not saying it's the fit for everybody. I'm saying the interaction is different. The way you digest information. In a traditional brick and mortar class, if you have 20 students in your classroom and you're taking an AP course, and I'm not quite getting the content, I can't ask that same question 5 times or 5 different ways. But in an online environment, I can have content repeated to me multiple times until I have firm understanding of what that content is, and can at least demonstrate that on the AP exam at the end of the year. That being said, I cannot advocate enough that this is a need that will bring all of our communities together in a modality that is in real time, and there would be equity in access. It's a passion of mine, and believe that it is the next step forward for our community.
Thanks so much, Glenn. I'm going to ask each of you one last question, and then we're going to go on ahead and wrap. And so, if you can truncate your answers, just so that we can make sure that everybody gets a response in here. First, Stephanie, I'd like to ask you a question that I'm deriving from a comment from Deb Hanmer over at PLTI around the disparity between in brick and mortar operations between city students and their suburban counterparts. We really didn't talk as much today about some of those disparities, both in terms of access as well as in terms of which buildings are actually open or not. Care to share any thoughts about whether that plays into a solution for some of the challenges that we're confronting, brick and mortar, and the role that it might play for digital divide?
Absolutely. And this really does speak to the race equity that you raised earlier. There are very large disparities between what our city families experience and what the suburban families do. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we really can't ignore the fact that it is only in the suburbs that children are currently receiving in-person learning. In the suburbs, you have more families who have more internet access. You have more families who have the technology skills to help their children with online learning. You have more families who are working from home, and so are there to, as stressful as that is, to assist, to guide, especially the youngest children in their online learning. So there are very big disparities there that we absolutely have to be addressing, and need to do everything possible to make sure that our city children have the support, the access, and can get back into the classroom as soon as possible.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. Regine, I turn to you. If you are, I've got a 7-year-old here who is as skilled on an iPad as I am. Yours is a generation that really grew up with technology. Curious if you see a role that students can play in helping to educate other students with respect to technology and using that technology. Basically, Sarah Hughes asked the question about whether technology requires us to think outside the box and outside of just what the companies want us to do. So are there ways that young people can collaborate together to solve some of their own challenges?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is that I feel now that we are using internet 100%, I do think we need to make it more of a necessity rather than it being temporary. Just like how we need to go grocery shopping and we need, AC on and we need heat. I think we also need to use the internet as a necessity now just because we are using it 100%. And this is the only option that we have for right now because it wouldn't be safe to, be in school, be in person because cases are going up. But some things I think that me and my peers can do to, educate each other and help each other are sometimes we just will go in breakout rooms on Zoom and we'll have a conversation and help each other out because sometimes it's better to hear an opinion, not just your teacher. So sometimes you can understand point of views from another student perspective rather than the teacher because sometimes you don't need the answer from the teacher. Sometimes you need an answer from a peer. So I think what I do now is by helping, because a lot of students personally, they do come to me because I do feel I'm an advocate for youth and they do come to me and ask me questions on the work or how can I do this or how can I do that. So by helping each other out, I do think that are trying to help each other by maybe emailing each other or coming as a group and going out and maybe working together or maybe just coming together on maybe a Zoom or some way or a FaceTime to where we can talk and show each other that we are able to work together because sometimes teachers aren't always available. So sometimes you have to work on your own time. And those are some of the things I think that we should definitely do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Regine. It feels like there really is a huge opportunity for us and empowering young people to help one another, both in terms of the skill development and also in terms of some of the emotional connection that we might be missing because we're all in our own respective homes. Glenn, I'll just turn to you and I'm just curious, this has been a collaborative moment, right? That's been kind of one of the exciting stories. Monroe County working with the school district, working with philanthropic partners. Christina Lopez asked the question about, and several folks did, about how they can help the school district with new ideas and new solutions. What's the right way for folks to do that? How should folks plan to get plugged in?
Pardon me, what was the last part of that?
Yeah, how can folks plan to get plugged in? How can they help? How can they volunteer? How can they? There's a whole bevy of questions that came in that area.
First of all, I think it's wonderful the community of Rochester coming together the way that it has. Going to our RCSD Learns page has so many resources there and ways to contact staff members. In terms of how can more parents maybe interact or become more involved in say, digital equity or digital concerns, going through your child's homeschool first. But listening to our conversation today, I think one thing that we need to do as a technology department in the city school district, Regina, you have brought up so many good points today. We need to start doing a better job of getting student input. While we do have instructional technology teachers out there in the buildings and virtual academy teachers, we need to formalize this more. You've brought so many good ideas and so much to this conversation that that's something we need to formalize as an information management and technology division. And so that's something after this conversation, this is something I'm taking away from this conversation to more formally recognize student voice. While we have informally, we need to do it in a more formal manner. So thank you for all your input today. It's been fantastic.
Terrific.
Of course, thank you.
And thank you all for the input and the conversation that we've had this morning. I do want to share with folks that There were some questions about contributing for MiFi devices and other ways to contribute resources. We're really glad that working in partnership with the school district, with Monroe County, and with Partners in Philanthropy, Rochester Area Community Foundation is hosting a fund, the COVID Education Fund. You can find information about it in the chat for those that are listening, and feel free to make contributions at your desire at recf.org. We're trying to amass dollars so that we can make sure that every kid that needs internet access has it. We recognize that this is a temporary solution. That was kind of the premise for today's conversation, that we're dealing with the horizon and then the horizon beyond the horizon. And so trying to confront the challenges that we have. And we're really grateful for the partners that we've had in doing that. We also, I'm grateful to work at a place like the Community Foundation because I get this little perch to see a lot of activity that's happening in Rochester. We know that folks at Common Ground Health are working out a solution that will provide for opportunities for folks to volunteer and get engaged with kind of a community help desk, if you will. And without getting too far out in front of these skis, there are a lot of wonderful opportunities that are emerging. Thank you again for joining us for today's conversation. I want you to be sure to tune in to tomorrow's live stream at 11 a.m. right here on Facebook Live for a guided conversation with local parents and those whose work focuses on parent engagement as they discuss teacher representation, the impact of COVID-19 on education, and the benefits and challenges of at-home learning with Kilolo Moya White, Maria Cruz, Khadijah Muhammad, and moderated by my friend Tiana Stevens from the Greater Rochester Health Foundation. We're excited. I hope that you'll be there and continue to join us throughout the week. And thank you again for having participated with us today.